In 1 Timothy 3:16, the King James Version reads, God was manifest in the flesh. The New International Version reads, He appeared in the flesh. Corta. That single word swap is not a stylistic preference. It rests on a documented manuscript decision, the choice between the Textus Receptus, which names God directly in that verse, and the critical text, which does not. For a new Christian handed either of these Bibles on their first week in church, that difference is invisible. And that is exactly the problem this video exists to solve. 7 Bibles are on the table today. 4 whose translation philosophy, committee structure, or commercial history puts them in the category of Bibles I would never place in the hands of someone just beginning to read scripture. And 3 where the evidence committee size, manuscript fidelity, publisher accountability actually supports the recommendation. Starting at number 7 with a Bible whose position on the shelf has been built almost entirely on marketing. Number 7. The Passion Translation presents a textbook case of what happens when a publishing category is misrepresented at the point of sale. Published initially in full in 2018 by Broad Street Publishing, the Passion Translation retails in its standard paperback edition typically between $15 and $25, with premium bonded leather editions reaching $50 or more. The number of scholars who produce this translation is 1. Brian Simmons, a missionary and author, is the sole translator listed in the front matter. That is not a committee. That is a personal interpretive project. The evidence is in the text itself. In John 1:1, most formal equivalence translations read, In the beginning was the Word. The Passion Translation renders the same verse as, In the beginning the living expression was already there. The Greek term being translated is logos, a specific philosophical and theological term with a documented translation history across centuries. Living expression is not a translation of logos. It is an interpretive expansion that introduces a concept not present in the Greek. At Revelation 22:19, Simmons himself acknowledges in footnotes that he is drawing from Aramaic Peshitta sources alongside the standard Greek manuscript tradition, a methodological choice made by one person, not reviewed by a denominational or academic committee, and not disclosed on the cover. The mechanism here is straightforward. A single author paraphrase has been packaged, priced, and shelved alongside multi-scholar translations. The reader who does not open the front matter will not know the difference. Verdict: you are not buying a translation. You are buying one person's interpretive framework applied to scripture, sold in a format that implies otherwise. Number 6, the Living Bible, takes a similar structure one generation earlier. Published in 1971 by Tyndale House Publishers, the Living Bible was produced by Kenneth N. Taylor, again a single author. Taylor himself described it as a paraphrase his words, not a critic's. He was paraphrasing the American Standard Version of 1901, not translating from the original Hebrew and Greek. The distinction is not minor. If the ASV contained a translation error, the Living Bible compounds it rather than corrects it, because it never consulted the source text. The Living Bible sold over 40 million copies in the decade following publication, largely on the strength of accessibility and an extensive marketing effort. Tyndale House later commissioned an actual translation committee to produce the New Living Translation, published in 1996 and substantially revised in 2004 and 2007, which does work from the original languages. The two products share a name family, but are fundamentally different in origin. New Christians given the Living Bible today are reading a 1,971 English paraphrase of a 1,901 English translation. The manuscript tradition is 2 layers removed before a single word is read. Verdict: the price is paid for readability, not for fidelity to the Hebrew and Greek. Number 5. The Message extends this pattern and deepens it. Published by NAV Press, beginning in 2002 inches its complete form, The Message is the work of Eugene Peterson, a single author working from the original languages but operating explicitly in the paraphrase tradition. Peterson stated clearly that his aim was to bring the tone and feel of Koine Greek into contemporary American English idiom. That is a legitimate literary goal. It is not a translation goal. In John 3:16, most formal equivalence translations render the verse with recognizable fidelity to the Greek monogenes, meaning only begotten or one and only. Peterson renders it, "This is how much God loved the world. He gave His Son, His one and only Son." The phrasing is readable. The doctrinal freight of only begotten, which carries centuries of Christological weight, is smoothed into casual register. At Romans 9:5, which in the Greek contains what many scholars understand as a direct ascription of the title God to Christ, Peterson's rendering removes the ambiguity entirely by restructuring the sentence in a direction that avoids the doctrinal question rather than translating it. NavPress is a publishing arm of the Navigators, a parachurch organization. The message has never been adopted as a primary text for academic biblical study at any accredited seminary this channel is aware of. It is used devotionally and in small group contexts. That is a legitimate use. It is not what a new Christian should be handed as the Bible they will study for the next 50 years. Verdict. You are paying for one author's contemporary idiom, not for the judgment of a credential translation committee working from the source text. Number 4. The New International Version, in its 2011 revision published by Zondervan, represents the most instructive case on this list because it began as a legitimate and substantial committee effort, and then underwent documented revision under commercial pressure. Zondervan is a subsidiary of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, which is owned by News Corp. The NIV was first published in 1978, following work by a committee convened in 1965. That original committee included credentialed scholars and produced a translation that, whatever its manuscript choices, reflected genuine committee accountability. The 2011 revision introduced gender-inclusive language changes that generated documented opposition from conservative scholars and organizations. The Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood formally opposed the revision. Wayne Grudem, who served on the ESV Translation Committee, stated publicly that the 2011 NIV changes in certain passages moved away from the original Greek and Hebrew in the direction of contemporary social convention rather than textual fidelity. In Revelation 3:20, the 2011 revision changed he to they in a context where the Greek pronoun is singular. In dozens of passages, the Greek aner, which specifically means man in the sense of a male person, was rendered with gender-neutral language. The NIV has sold over 450 million copies since 1978. That scale means the 2011 revision, regardless of doctrinal concerns, became the default Bible in a majority of evangelical bookstores and church welcome packets almost overnight. A new Christian receiving an NIV today will almost certainly receive the 2011 text. Zondervan's commercial incentive is to sell that edition, not to revise it toward the positions of the scholars who objected. Verdict. The premium here is paid for distribution infrastructure and brand recognition, not for the translation philosophy the original committee established. Before we move to the Bibles, I do recommend you need 4 tests. 4 things you can check before you buy any Bible to separate a translation from a commercial product dressed as one. First, open the front matter and find the translation philosophy. Look for formal equivalence or essentially literal. These aim for word fidelity. Dynamic equivalence or thought for thought means the committee chose readability over precision. Paraphrase means it is one person's interpretation, not a translation. Second, turn to 1 Timothy 3:16. If it reads, God was manifest in the flesh, the translation follows the textus receptus. If it reads, He appeared in the flesh or something similar, it follows the critical text. Neither choice is automatically disqualifying, but the choice tells you which manuscript tradition the publisher trusts and whether they disclosed it. Third, find the translation committee. A faithful translation lists dozens of credentialed scholars from multiple denominations. A paraphrase lists one author. The Passion Translation lists Brian Simmons alone. The English Standard Version lists over 100 scholars from institutions including Wheaton, Reformed Theological Seminary, Westminster Theological Seminary, and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. Fourth, check whether the translation has been adopted by accredited seminaries for academic study, not just for devotional use. Dallas Theological Seminary, the Master's Seminary, Westminster Theological Seminary, and Southern Baptist Theological Seminary all specify translations in their academic requirements. Translations that pass peer review in those contexts have been vetted in ways that devotional sales figures cannot replicate. Every video on this channel applies these same tests. No publisher partnerships. No denominational sponsorships. If that is the kind of analysis you wish someone did before you bought your next Bible, you already know what to do. Number 3. The New American Standard Bible, published originally in 1971 by the Lockman Foundation, and most recently updated in its 2020 revision, operates on a fundamentally different model from everything reviewed so far. The Lockman Foundation is a non-profit Christian ministry. It has no parent corporation. It is not owned by News Corp or HarperCollins or any commercial holding group. The NASB was produced by a committee of scholars and has been revised through formal review processes in 1977, 1995, and 2020. Each revision documented and attributed. The NASB's stated philosophy is formal equivalence, meaning the committee prioritized rendering each word of the Hebrew and Greek with a corresponding English word wherever the target language allowed. In 1 Timothy 3:16, the NASB 2020 reads, "He who was revealed in the flesh, following the critical text rather than the textus receptus, a choice that is documented, consistent with the committee's manuscript base, and disclosed in the front matter." At John 1:1, it reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." No expansion, no paraphrase, no idiom inserted between the Greek and the English reader. The NASB has been adopted as an academic text at Dallas Theological Seminary and remains one of the most commonly cited translations in conservative evangelical commentary work. Standard editions retail typically between $20 and $40 depending on binding. Verdict: the translation philosophy is in honest alignment with the committee composition and the publisher's accountability structure. Number 2. The New King James Version, published in 1982 by Thomas Nelson, brings a distinct combination of textual transparency and readability that distinguishes it from both the villains on this list and the paraphrase tradition. Thomas Nelson is a commercial publisher, now a subsidiary of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, the same parent company as Sondervan. That corporate relationship is worth noting. However, the NKJV's translation committee consisted of 130 scholars, and its defining characteristic is its manuscript base. The NKJV follows the Textus Receptus for the New Testament and the Ben Chaim Masoretic text for the Old Testament, the same manuscript tradition underlying the original 1611 King James Version. This means that in 1 Timothy 3:16, the NKJV reads, "God was manifested in the flesh," consistent with the Textus Receptus. In Mark 16:9-20, the NKJV includes the passage in the main text without relegating it to a footnote, again consistent with its manuscript commitments. John MacArthur, whose study Bible notes are published in an NKJV edition by Thomas Nelson, has stated publicly that the NKJV represents a reliable formal equivalence rendering of the received text tradition. The NKJV has been in continuous use in conservative, evangelical, and Baptist congregations since its publication. Standard editions retail between $25 and $50. Verdict: committee size, manuscript transparency, and 40 years of academic use by conservative scholars place this in a category the commercial Bibles above cannot reach. Number 1. The English Standard Version, published in 2001 by Crossway, delivers a level of scholarship that stands alone on this list for a specific structural reason. Crossway is a non-profit ministry publisher. It is not a subsidiary of a commercial holding company. It has no shareholders. Its stated purpose is to publish gospel-centered resources, and its Bible publishing arm is not subject to the commercial revision pressures that documented changes in the NIV 2011. The ESV was produced by a committee of over 100 scholars drawn from more than a dozen denominations, including Baptists, Presbyterians, Anglicans, and Lutherans. Wayne Grudem of Phoenix Seminary served on the oversight committee. J.I. Packer, whose scholarship in systematic theology spans decades, served as a senior theological advisor. The ESV follows the critical text for the New Testament, the Masoretic text for the Old Testament, and its formal equivalence philosophy is stated plainly and applied consistently. In Romans 9-5, a verse where the Greek allows two readings depending on punctuation, one that ascribes the title God to Christ, and one that does not, the ESV renders it, "Who is God over all, blessed forever," taking the interpretation that affirms the Christological reading and footnotes the alternative. That is what transparent committee scholarship looks like: a decision made, disclosed, and attributed. The ESV has been adopted as the primary academic text at Westminster Theological Seminary, Covenant Theological Seminary, and is the recommended translation at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary under Albert Mohler. Standard editions retail between $20 and $45. Study Bible editions range from $50 to over $100 depending on binding. Verdict: the non-profit publisher, the 100 Scholar Committee, the manuscript fidelity, and the seminary adoption record make this the only Bible on this list, where every dollar of the price can be traced directly to the work of scholarship and not to commercial infrastructure. Across the 7 Bibles reviewed today, one pattern stands out with no exceptions. Price does not reflect fidelity. The Message and the Passion Translation can be found at the same price point as the ESV and the NASB. The cover gives you no information about whether one person or 100 people made the translation decisions inside. What separates a Bible you can build a lifetime of study on from a Bible that will quietly mislead a new believer is in the front matter, the committee list, and the manuscript footnotes 3 pages that most readers and most gift givers never open. The new Christian in your life deserves a Bible whose every doctrinal choice was made by a room full of accountable scholars, disclosed in writing, and tested in the classrooms of institutions that have staked their credibility on getting it right. In an industry built on packaging, knowing what backs a translation is what protects your faith.